in support of international peace and security. It is my sincere hope that Russia will rejoin the international consensus against the use of chemical weapons and the collective effort to uphold it. If so, this Council will again be able to work together to rid the world of chemical weapons. But if not, we should leave no one in any doubt of the international community's determination to uphold international non-proliferation regimes. Not all the challenges faced by the counter-proliferation framework come before this Council, but they are no less urgent. We need to strengthen the rules to keep pace with new technologies and more complex global supply chains. We must help every UN member to develop their capabilities and regulation and ensure they are able to make their contribution to this global effort. The quiet but essential role the United Nations plays must be at the heart of these efforts. So as UN members, we should invest the expertise and diplomatic resources necessary in the conventions. Mr. President, it was collective engagement by states across the globe that produced the counter-proliferation framework. Even the most powerful recognized that investing in collective rules-based restraint was the only effective way of addressing national security interests and avoiding unilateral recourse to force. We cannot let the framework be undermined today by those who reject the values and disregard the rules that have kept us safe. It will take collective engagement to reinforce it in the face of today's challenges. And in this, as has always been the case, the UK will play a leading role.
President ever to challenge China on trade. And we are winning on trade. We are winning at every level.
Policies in line with national conditions and be encouraged to enhance non-proliferation, law enforcement capacity building, carry out more exchanges and practical cooperation so that together we could shore up the shortest plank in the barrel and achieve universal security. Mr. President, the JCPOA on the Iranian nuclear issue is a hard-won achievement of multilateralism conducive to international nuclear non-proliferation regime and peace and stability in the Middle East. There is no international agreement that is perfect. The JCPOA has been endorsed unanimously by the Security Council. What happened in the past 3 years shows that JCPOA is a viable agreement. China encourages Iran to continue to fulfill all commitments it has made. At the same time, the legitimate right of all countries to normal economic relations and trade with Iran should be respected. China calls on the relevant parties to bear in mind the big picture, think long-term, and uphold the sanctity, integrity, and efficacy of the JCPOA. Since the beginning of this year, the situation on the Korean Peninsula has shown major progress. China welcomes that, and China has made unremitting efforts for this to happen. China supports the important common understandings reached between the DPRK and US leaders at the Singapore summit, support DPRK and ROK in improving their relations. We call upon all parties to seize the current opportunities, turn the political consensus into concrete actions, and work in the direction of setting up a peace mechanism on the peninsula and the denuclearization on the peninsula to realize lasting peace on the peninsula at an early date. Mr. President, China lives by its commitment to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, to upholding the UN-centered contemporary international system, and has earnestly fulfilled its international responsibilities and obligations. We need to work together to uphold the efforts to realize peace and security for all. Before I conclude, I need to point out that China has all along followed the principle of non-interference in other countries' domestic affairs. This is a tradition of Chinese foreign policy. Our observance of this principle has received acclaim from the international community. We did not and will not interfere in any country's domestic affairs. We refuse to accept any unwarranted accusations against China, and we call upon other countries to also observe the purposes of the UN Charter and not to interfere in other countries' internal affairs. Thank you.
I thank the Minister for his statement. Thank you. I now give the floor to the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russia Federation.
Thank you very much, distinguished President. Distinguished colleagues, in the world today, effectively combating the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction is particularly important for maintaining global and regional stability, for ensuring that we reliably provide for the security of all states without exception. And constructive interaction here is an important element in order to create a positive international agenda. I think that everyone will agree that the Security Council resolution providing for specific measures against those who violate the non-proliferation regime, that this resolution has to be strictly abided by. The cornerstone here is a basic resolution 1540 to prevent situations where weapons of mass destruction as components end up in the hands of non-state entities. Of particular importance are also other Security Council decisions pursuant to resolutions providing for sanctions for any kind of transfer of weapons to terrorists. There are facts of such transfers having taken place and they need to be closely investigated. As was the case 50 years ago when the NPT was opened for signature, so is today our country is committed to the goal of ridding the world of nuclear threat. But at the same time, we need to absolutely take into account all of the factors impacting strategic stability. And in the course of negotiations, all countries now participate, all countries which have the nuclear weapons potential. The desire of countries to ban nuclear weapons separately from the basic principles of NPT cannot be successful and will only create ambiguity in our future approaches to weapons of mass destruction, non-proliferation. Since we're talking about NPT, I'd like to mention Resolution 2231, which was approved by the Security Council and which is a joint comprehensive plan of action on the Iran nuclear program. The unilateral withdrawal of the United States from this creates a serious threat for the non-proliferation regime, all the more so since, as this was underscored by many, Tehran is strictly abiding by its commitments within JCPOA, and this is something that the IAEA is regularly confirming. Russia is convinced that we need to keep JCPOA, and this is something that we're actively working on together with Iran, China, and the EU. Otherwise, if we don't do that, we can end up with a situation where there is more tension in the Middle East, and this could lead to risks for national stability and for the non-proliferation regime. The dismantlement of JCPOA would also be counterproductive also for the efforts underway now to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. These efforts is something that we welcome and support. There are also serious obstacles to nuclear non-proliferation, and I am referring to the decision made by the United States to postpone for a long time, perhaps forever, the ratification of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty and the absence of progress in implementing the NPT decision to create a weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. There is also an alarming situation we're witnessing in the area of chemical disarmament, and this has to do first and foremost with what was done by certain Western countries which keep leveling new unfounded accusations against them, accusing them of using the Syrian authorities ban substances, and we warn against strikes against the Syrian Arab Republic using a staged pretext. If this were to happen, this would be a gross violation of the Charter and would undermine efforts to foster the political settlement in that country. The government of Syria destroyed all of their chemical arsenal in line with the Russia-US agreement of 2013, and this agreement is enshrined in a Security Council resolution and also in a decision passed by OPCW. But on the other hand, the terrorist groups are entities which have chemical warfare agents. They learned how to synthesize them, but they're building labs for that. And this is something that we have been warned about this for a long time by intelligence services of many countries, including the American ones. We have on many occasions offered to help develop a comprehensive strategy on combat chemical terrorism. In 2017, for example, we submitted together with China a draft on such a resolution. It was not considered, through no fault of our own. More broadly speaking, at the Conference of Disarmament in Geneva, we submitted a draft convention on combating acts of chemical and biological terrorism. Sadly, the work on this is being artificially blocked, and you, I'm certain, know which countries are blocking that. Nonetheless, the proposals contained therein are on the table. At the same time, there is a deterioration of the situation in OPCW. There, our Western colleagues are trying to impose on its technical secretariat the so-called attribution functions, which is a gross violation of the convention and an infringement on the prerogatives of the Security Council. At the same time, what we're witnessing is an increase in unsubstantiated, highly likely styled rhetoric about the Salisbury affair. At the same time, the UK is stubbornly avoiding the joint investigation that we've offered several times, despite the fact that this is part of her commitments in line with the Chemical Weapons Convention, the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations of 1963, Bilateral Consular Convention of 1965, and the European Convention on Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Cases of 1959. Question arises, if they do not want to cooperate, well, does this mean that they have something to hide? We call upon London once again to start a constructive dialogue in order to get to the truth. The way things are developing gives us reason to think that nothing can be excluded today, including a provocation involving biological weapons. Given the attempts I just mentioned to manipulate the status of the Chemical Weapons Convention, I'd like to warn against the temptation of using the Convention on Biological and Toxin Weapons for the same end. Let me recall, in line with the convention, the right to initiate and is the right to strengthen the WMD non-proliferation regime. Our two states were at the inception of creating the general framework for multilateral cooperation in order to counter the weapons of mass destruction ending in the hands of non-stated entities and countering the acts of nuclear terrorism. We continue thinking that this interaction is of principal importance, not just for Moscow and Washington, but for the entire international community. Let us not sacrifice this on the altar of calculations of the moment of momentary situations. On the basis of the UN Charter, Russia is always ready to work openly with nuclear 5 states, all other countries, in order to strengthen global strategic stability. And we expect that a step in this direction will be made today at this meeting of the Security Council, which is a key body to maintain international peace and security. And we think that in this regard, the initiative undertaken by President Trump to convene this meeting is very, very timely. Thank you.
I thank the Minister for his statement. Thank you. I now